Welcome back. We are in our second week studying the book of Ruth. And if you aren't caught up, in chapter 1, we found out that there's a huge famine in the land and the family has to move. And so they move to Moab, and they become like very invested in the Moabite culture. And so, the husband, the wife, and the two sons, and then they live there for a while. The sons get married. They marry two daughters, Oprah and Ruth. And, then all the boys die. The dad and the two sons die. And then you have Naomi, the mother, and the two daughter-in-laws that don't know what to do. And so she basically advises them to stay in Moab and find new husbands. But Ruth decides, no, I'm going to go back with you to Bethlehem, that you're going to be my mom and your God's going to be my God. And the choice I'm making today and my commitment to this choice is steadfast. And she even uses the phrase, may God deal with me ever so severely, even if we're separated in death. Like, in other words, I'm pledging my life to be loyal to you no matter what. And it's kind of a beautiful beautiful family moment where this happens. But, you quickly see in chapter 2, this interesting thing that starts to unpack is that, when you start to choose a different path, then you start to be in charge of your intentional choices. And so when you break away from what are even societal norms at the time, and so it makes me think of this idea of, like, if you do what most people do, you're going to get what most people get, right? It's a little bit of like Dave Ramsey is famous for this, right? If you want to, if you want to live like the very best, you got to live like the very best, right? If you want to have the most, you got to live the most. You can't continue to do what you've always done and expect different results. And so I want to just take a moment and let's look at some statistics about relationships in our culture. I told you that the book of Ruth was this multi-layered, nuanced book that's really small and often overlooked, that talks about God showing up in the mundane, but also it's about choices, it's about decision, it's about loyalty, it's about family. But then it also becomes this interesting book about, like, how to find the love that you've been looking for, the love that you desire, the companionship, the connectivity that you've always been looking for. And, amidst the ever-changing landscape of American culture, there's some staggering statistics when it comes to the declining of marriage and the societal norms of divorce. Current trends are showing us that in marriage relationships, over the last 50 years, marriage rates have dropped in the U.S. by nearly 60%. So think about that. That as a whole, 60% of people are just not getting married. They're just living together or never getting married, right? 63% of men under the age of 30 are choosing to be single or remain single, which, 50 years ago, that was unheard of. If you were in your late 30s or early 30s, late 20s, you should be married by now. 70% of millennials prefer to live with their partner before marriage. And so that has become, there's been a shift in the societal norms of how we view marriage, what marriage looks like, how we treat marriage, all those sorts of things. And Ruth's story and her journey from Moab to Bethlehem with Naomi stands out as this sort of beacon of hope of what it could be like. It reminds us that love that we seek is often found in the most unlikely of places. And so as we dive into this concept of, if you do what everybody else is doing, you're going to get what everybody else is getting. Part of the reason why people aren't getting married is because they don't believe in the institution of marriage, because the sanctity of marriage has been kind of like put on the back burner. It's no longer important. Marriage has become some sort of simple social construct and no longer about providing, loving, caring, building, legacy, children, all of those sorts of parts and pieces. And so while it's a complicated conversation because we're taking an ancient text and we're looking at it through the lens of a modern person, we're also looking at societal norms from an ancient time that seem backwards to us, and trying to make sense of what we could do with that in our everyday lives. But when they leave Moab, look at verse 1, chapter 1, verse 16, when she says, where you go, I will go, I will stay, I will stay, where you stay, I will stay, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. Ruth is choosing a different path, and there's this importance that she's making this intentional choice. She's breaking away from societal norms because she longs for something more fulfilling. Now, again, the text doesn't necessarily say this, but there's something about her relationship with her mother-in-law that makes her say, no, you're my mom now. I'm not going back to my own mother. And that's a beautiful statement that she's making. And so when she decides, or she makes this intentional choice to turn away from Moab, then she finds God's blessing in Bethlehem. And so I want to challenge you today. Like when it comes to your relationship, if you're young, if you're dating, if you're engaged, or maybe you're not young and you're on your second, third, fourth marriage and or divorce even, and you're thinking about dating again, like, are you continuing to do the same thing that you've always done? Are your marriages, are you going through marriages like way too quickly because you're doing the same thing, repeating the same mistakes over and over again? Or are you willing to turn away from Moab or the standard practices that are normal in society and start to lean into your own Bethlehem or God's way of doing things? And so when we use this phrase Moab and Bethlehem, this is what we're using it as. There's the world's way of doing things, and then there's God's way of doing things. And so you see in chapter 2, verses 1 and 3, it says, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech. And so this is most likely a cousin or a nephew on the side of Elimelech, so her son. And his name is Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the grain that's being left over behind, in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi says to her, go ahead, my daughter. So Ruth went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. Now, there's some significance to this. It's a beautiful part of the story where these two women have now found their way back to Bethlehem. But again, remember, they don't have husbands, and neither one of them are spring chickens, as it were, right? So they've got to figure out a way to feed themselves. And what was very common was for the poor and for the foreigner or the immigrant to be allowed to glean. And what gleaning was after the harvesters had gone through the field, people would follow behind and sort of pick up whatever got left over or whatever got missed. And so when Ruth says to Naomi, I'm going to go and I'm going to glean the fields with whoever's eyes I find favor, in other words, she's saying whoever will look upon me with kindness, right? I'm going to go and do that. But this unexpected connection happens when we find out that even though Boaz is there and he's a cousin or a nephew of some sort in the family, she finds herself actually in his field. Look at verse 3. Ruth went out to gather the grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in the field that belonged to Boaz, a relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. And so this was a required behavior in the ancient Israelite world. In fact, the Torah told them that they had to show generosity towards the poor and towards the immigrant. And one of the ways that they did that was build it into that they always left some leftovers in the field for anyone so that no one would starve. And so, you've got this moment in time where, she's made a decision to turn away from the Moab ways and lean into the Israelite ways. And she does it pretty quick. She says, I'm going to go gleaning because this is the custom of the people, right? And sometimes, if you're taking notes, write this down. Sometimes God uses natural circumstances in our lives to bring around supernatural events. Sometimes God uses the natural as a catalyst for the supernatural. And this is what happens in this moment. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. Lord be with you, common greeting. He says to them, the Lord bless you, the harvesters reply. And then Boaz said to his foreman, who's that young woman over there? Who does she belong to? And then notice that he sees her and his imagination, his eye is perked up. It gives new meaning to the phrase that Ruth says in verse 2, that I'll go pick up leftover grain behind whoever's eyes I find favor. She definitely finds favor in the eyes of Boaz. He looks at her and goes, wow, who's the beautiful woman that's over there picking grain and gleaning? And the foreman replies, she is a young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since. And so there's this interesting sort of dynamic that if you take the time to unpack it, remember the whole kind of lesson that we're trying to learn here is if you continue to do what most people do, you'll get what most people get. But then you also have this subcontext of like finding love in, all the right places. And so Boaz sees qualities in Ruth that are interesting and noteworthy, right? So he sees that she's faithful to God because she's there gleaning the field, meaning that she understands the laws of God, and that she's loyal to her family because there she is doing it on behalf of Naomi. She's a hard worker, and she honors God with her morality. And so we see these qualities in what she's doing and the choices that she's making. I'm sure at this point the story has traveled to the family members that Naomi's back in town and that she brought her her daughter-in-law with her, that one of the daughter-in-laws remained loyal to her even though it made tough decisions, that one of the daughter-in-laws has chosen to, follow after Yahweh even though she could go back to her own home. And so he finds this intriguing and he notices these qualities in Ruth. By the way, these are the qualities, guys, if you're looking for a wife, these are the qualities that you should be looking for. You should be looking for a girl that's faithful to God, a girl that's loyal to her family, a girl that's a hard worker, and a girl that honors God with her morality or her everyday living choices. Not just honors God on Sunday, but honors God even when no one else is looking. And so these are the things that Boaz notices in Ruth. So Boaz goes over in verses 8 and 9, and he says to her, listen, my daughter. And so he says to her in a very older, slightly older, respectful, kind way. He says, right here with us, stay right here with us and gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water that they have drawn from the well. And so he goes out of his way to say, I'm gonna put my arm around you. You have my covering and my protection in this moment. The guys aren't gonna mess with you. I know that could be scary, but if you stay here, you're gonna have enough grain. Don't go looking in other fields. It may not be as safe for you there. Someone might take advantage of you there. Stay here, and I've instructed my guys to take care of you. And in that moment, Ruth notices in Boaz some qualities that are noteworthy, right? So he honors her by referring to her as daughter or family, right? You might even, you could possibly use the phrase sister or cousin there, would be the same thing. In a lot of cultures, they refer to each other as cousins, or the young adults refer to every older adult as auntie or uncle, even though there's even no family relation. So there's this honor her, he protects her, he provides for her, right? And then, this idea of even him, he's praying over her in the way that he's leading. And I want you to look for these qualities. Young ladies, I want you to look for these kind of qualities in a man. I want you to look for a man that will honor you, a man that will protect you, a man that will provide for you, and a man that will pray for you. Like, I know there's a lot of things out there, but I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, if he has a six-pack, that's a bonus. I get it, right? But if he doesn't pray for you, if he doesn't provide for you, if he doesn't protect you, he doesn't honor you, that six-pack is going to turn into a keg eventually, right? Like the outward appearance, the looks, the money, the car, the stuff, both male and female, none of that matters. What matters is their godly character. And if you want a relationship that stands the test of time, you're going to have to look for things that are going against societal norms. Societal norms tell us to look for someone that has all the right physical features, that has the right job, that has the right lifestyle, that has the right stuff, that has their life dialed in, blah, 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 right? But in reality, what really matters to God and what really matters for your long-term success in a relationship is the internal stuff. And notice that both Ruth and Boaz notice these things about each other, and that's intriguing to them. It's why they're drawn to each other, because there's these unspoken attributes that are acted out in the everyday. In fact, look at verse 14. It's mealtime, and Boaz says to her, hey, come over here, have some bread, dip it in the wine, right, and the vinegar, and sat down with the harvesters, and he offered her some roasted grain, and she ate all that she wanted, and that she had some left over. And so we're left with this beautiful moment, and I don't want to make too much out of it, because this is a descriptive passage, not necessarily a prescriptive passage. But notice that he pays for the meal, gentlemen. Notice that he is being an honoring, protecting, providing type of person in this moment, where he calls her over and he gives her more, and he gives her something. He offers her a sense of protection and provision, and he gives her a place of honor. What would this look like in modern day culture? Like, open the doors, pull out the chair. Like, when the check comes, pay for it. If she wants to help you pay for it, that's fine, but don't leave it sitting there. Like, you asked her out, you pay for it. Like, again, I know this sounds old school, and probably Pastor Eric's like an old man in this moment, but there's some interesting context here of, if you want a woman who is faithful, loyal, a hard worker, and makes moral choices, then you better give her something that looks like that it's going to be worth it for her. Like, do you honor her? Do you protect her? Do you provide for her? Do you pay for her? And then, all of these parts and pieces, as they come together, have the makings of something powerful. And so we're left in the middle of chapter 2 with this beautiful imagery of intimacy and generosity and abundance as they're sitting down for a meal. And we look at what's happening as they've made decisions in the beginning of their relationship. And we'll unpack this in the weeks to come a little bit more. But like this sort of first date moment that happens, it's a beautiful thing where, they're finding love in a not so ideal situation that's happened, that's panned out. There's been a famine. She's a widow. She's poor. She's out gleaning the fields, but she captures his attention. Why? Well, because of her character. And he captures her attention. Why? Because of his character. Your character matters. And we live in a culture, we live in a world where the societal norm of character doesn't matter. We're really interested in competency and chemistry. While those things are important, character is the foundation. Character is everything. So let me pray for you as we draw to a close today. Lord, we're just grateful for the wisdom that we find in this short little story from the book of Ruth. And this story, it speaks to the depths of our desires as human beings to be in meaningful, connected relationships. But the choices that we make as we pursue love, Lord, there have to be choices that are choices based in character. Yes, chemistry is important. Yes, our competencies as a human being is important. But that character, that God-honoring, Bible-focused, centered choices that we make, Lord, help us to embrace these lessons that we're learning from the life of Ruth, from the life of Boaz, and apply them to our lives as they are appropriate. Lord, let your presence be felt. I pray right now for all the young men and women who are seeking long-term love relationships. I pray for those who are on their second and third time around looking for love. And that, Lord, that you would help them to have character that outshines the others around them. And that you would help them to find the love that you have for them in even some of the most obscure places and spaces. Lord, let us feel your presence in the midst of our lives as we seek to not only lead well, but to love well. And in your name we pray all of this. Amen.